It's the most magical time of the year, and I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about the NFL season. So make sure you're ready with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV. Get the most live NFL games all in one place. Right now, you can save $85 when you bundle NFL Sunday Ticket with YouTube TV. Sign up today at youtubetv.com/Spotify. Device and content restrictions apply. Discount applied to first 4 months of YouTube TV, then $72.99 a month. Ends August 29th. Terms, restrictions, and embargoes apply. No refunds.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Welcome to the chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 165 of Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter and YouTube at ShaneHaffNFL. And I'm joined today by the best co-host in the game. You've heard him on the Tough Cover radio show. It is Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at MarkHenryJr_. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing well. We are getting closer and closer to football. I mean, we're only a couple.
Mark, you're back.
I could not be closer to my wireless router right now. So I have no idea what just happened. The people they didn't want me to get my thoughts out about the AFC East and North. So yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. Well, I will somehow clean all that up maybe in post-production. So there might be some weird jumps there for our audio platform listeners, but nevertheless, we will press on. Glad you're back with us. You love doing live shows, and we can chat for 5 minutes before we start, and everything's fine. And as soon as you hit record or go live, everything goes haywire. But nevertheless, we are here. We're going to break down the AFC East and the AFC North for you guys today. This is part 3 of a 4-part series where we're going through breaking down every division in the NFL to give Eagles fans an idea what's going on around the league. So next week, early in the week, we'll do the AFC West and South. The following week, we're going to do our awards draft that we do annually, drafting like Rookie of the Year on both sides of the ball, MVP, Coach of the Year, Super Bowl winners. We'll come back at the end of the year and compare notes on that. And then the following week, we will have regular season football to talk about. So this show will be coming to you on Mondays most of the time during the season, and we're specifically going to break down the NFC East games. So you can find out, if you didn't get to watch the Cowboys, Giants, Commanders, let us do that homework for you. We'll tell you what you need to know as well as some of the other top games around the league. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop in here, Mark. And let's start out with the AFC East, and let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. Actually, before we do that, I got to go to a comment here from one of our longtime listeners, Joe Ciccoletti. Says, I don't know what's worse, the Patriots this upcoming season or Mark's Wi-Fi. Yikes.
Usually I can blame a hotel or I can blame somewhere else that I've been all over the globe. But this is I couldn't be. I'm looking at my wireless router on the ground to the left of me. Who knows? What a joke.
We'll blame StreamYard. But
yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's dive into the Buffalo Bills. So last season, the Buffalo Bills went 11-6. In the postseason, they beat the Steelers 13-17 on Wild Card Weekend before losing to the eventual Super Bowl champion Chiefs 27-24 in the divisional round of the playoffs. They lost a lot this offseason. So they lose Stephon Diggs. They lose Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis, Leonard Floyd, Tyrell Dotson, Dane Jackson, and Micah Hyde. They go out and they add Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, Nicholas Morrow, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Taylor Rapp. And then in the draft, their big guy they got was literally a big guy, Keon Coleman, who they traded back for and selected at the top end of round 2. My big question for the Bills, and I don't know if I can even call this a big question because I'm going to answer it, is, do the Bills have a better roster this season? And they absolutely don't. I mean, they had to get rid of a lot of vets as Josh Allen's cap hit jumped from $18 million to $30 million, and it's due to jump to $60 million next season. So for me, it feels like the Bills' window is rapidly closing because it just doesn't feel like Allen can out Mahomes as the Bills' roster degrades around him. And it's unfortunate because I think if the Bills were in the NFC, they might have been to 2 or 3 Super Bowls by now. But they have just come crashing down on the rock that is Patrick Mahomes, it seems like, every offseason. And I don't know. I mean, this team didn't get better this offseason. I'm not sure how they get past Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, this is the weirdest division in football to me, to try to predict, to try to make a call on what's going to happen. What's the Bills over-under? I'm sure it's either 9.5 or 10.5.
Their over-under is set at 10.5 right now, and they have the 23rd easiest strength of schedule in the NFL.
Yeah. I would go under there. I would go under. Someone has to win this division. I keep finding myself getting lower on each team as we get closer. Another news broke today. Matt Milano tore his bicep. He is probably out for the year. So they said maybe he can come back in December. That is just you can add that name to the list of departures or guys that they lost. And I totally agree with Shane. We're going to get to another team in this division that I think you'd be hard pressed to tell me they got better. And Shane mentioned the Bills Super Bowl window closing. I would argue that what they're trying to do is they're trying to open the next one, and they're trying to figure out the path forward with Josh Allen on this big money deal. And it's going to come down to how they drafted this year. How is Keon Coleman? Is Dalton Kincaid the next Travis Kelce? That's what these questions are going to be for you to move on from one era to the next and bridge the gap while still paying your quarterback all this money when you squandered the opportunity of winning with his rookie deal. You're going to have to hit on a lot of draft picks, and you're not only going to have to hit, you're going to have to hit big on a couple. So that's where the Bills are at right now, and it's hard to do that when you're not picking in the top 10 to 15.
Yeah, it's and you pay Josh Allen every time because I think he's the second best quarterback in the NFL. But it's hard to see Allen beating Mahomes in the postseason without Stephon Diggs when he couldn't do it with Stephon Diggs and with a duo of all-pro safeties and an all-pro cornerback that are all gone now. And so it's just he's had the roster advantage, I feel like, for a few years, and they just weren't able to get over the hump. And so I'm not sure what buttons you press there. I also have the under. I had them as a 10-win team. I do think they make the playoffs. I don't think they win their division, though. I've got a different team winning this division.
I had them at 9, and I had them narrowly missing the playoffs at 9 wins. So no Bills in this year's playoffs. I have a couple pretty crazy teams in the AFC that you're leaving out, and one crazy team that I have in. But I like you said, I think I'm hard pressed to find why they're better. And I think if you're in the AFC, in the arms race of the AFC, you look at the quarterbacks, you look at the draft picks that have went there in the last couple of years. I just think if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. So I could see Buffalo taking a real step back, and this being the final year of Sean McDermott.
All right. Well, let's move on to another team in this division that desperately is trying to figure something out, and that's the Miami Dolphins, who last year went 11-6. They lost to the Chiefs 26-7 on Wild Card Weekend, and then you get into this offseason, and they're another team that lost a lot. They lost Christian Wilkins. They lost Deshaun Elliott. They lose Xavier Howard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jerome Baker, Robert Hunt. They lost a lot of veteran players. And they tried to go out and make some moves in free agency. They got Kendall Fuller, Aaron Brewer. They got Jordan Poyer, who we mentioned earlier is a loss for the Bills. Jordan Brooks, Jonnu Smith, Odell Beckham Jr. In the draft, they got Chop Robinson and Patrick Paul.
Oh, I love Paul.
Yeah, I know you love Patrick Paul. My question for the Dolphins is, did they make a mistake paying Tua? I mean, it came at the expense of a lot of veterans on the roster, and the roster is unquestionably worse this season. And then their draft was full of athletic projects. I mean, Chop Robinson is an athletic freak that doesn't really know how to rush the passer. Patrick Paul's an athletic freak that has a lot of development to do. So was leaning into that the right call? The Dolphins have floundered in cold weather. They've fallen off late in seasons. And then against good teams the last few years, they haven't gotten it done. Last year, they were 1-6 versus playoff teams. And so they have the 8th easiest strength of schedule this year. And so I fully expect the Dolphins to come out and set the world on fire in September and October. And I will not believe it until I see it in January. So what are your thoughts on the Dolphins as they head into this season?
I think the Dolphins offensively had a lot of really unrepeatable things happen. I struggle to see the room for any sort of growth on the offense. Tua Tagovailoa probably not going to lead the league in passing yards again. Tyreek Hill probably not going to eclipse his all-time high in all receptions and reception yards, and I guess right under his career high in touchdowns. I don't think he's getting over 1,800 yards. I don't think he's getting 120 or more touchdowns. I don't think he's getting 14 or more touchdowns. I think last year, probably the best year we're going to see from Tyreek Hill. Maybe that's crazy to say, but I think that was kind of the peak of what he can do. Jalen Waddle, maybe there's a little room for growth there. Obviously, I look at this from a fantasy perspective a little bit. So there's always that angle. Raheem Mostert, is he going to run for 19 touchdowns? Javon Achane, is he going to run for 8 yards per carry? I struggle to see where the improvement comes from.
Yeah, and like I said, they do have an easier schedule this year, but the offense was clicking on all cylinders, at least when healthy last year and early in the season. They have an over-under win total at 9.5 this year. Personally, I have them hitting the over on that win total. I just feel like this is a team that they can probably go push to win their division. And I still, even if they win that division, when they walk into Wild Card Weekend, I'm going to feel like they're going to lose to whoever they play against. It's just a team that has struggled tremendously against good teams. And I just don't know if that's going to change moving forward. Before I get your thought on that, let me throw back to a comment here that Joe Chick chimed in about the Bills. He said, Brian Dable leaving was going to hinder the success of Josh Allen and the Bills, and it has. And I think there's some truth to that too. I think Brian Dable did a good job when he was there, and obviously we saw the change in offensive coordinator throughout the season last year. But back to the Dolphins here, Mark. Over under at 9.5. Where do you see that shaking out?
I went under. This is another team I have missing the playoffs. Like it feels crazy with all these teams, but Miami, I have them slightly under at 9 wins. There's part of me that wants to lower them to 8 wins. And I'm going to mention this in a couple divisions, or I guess next week when we talk about the AFC West. The most under talked about storyline, or I guess player acquisition of the entire offseason is Christian Wilkins. I think Christian Wilkins is one of the, I don't know, Shane, 15 best defensive players. Is that crazy? Like, is he a top 15, top 10 potentially defensive player in the NFL? Christian Wilkins is that good. He's arguably maybe one of the best in his position without Aaron Donald now. So I think that was a huge addition for Vegas and maybe even a bigger loss for the Miami Dolphins. And I talked all of those about the offense, about Achane not being able to have historic efficiency, about Mostert not being able to have insane touchdown numbers, about Tyreek Hill not having the best season of all time, about Tua not leading the passing touchdowns. They also lost their defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio, who kind of really leveled them up last year. And they also lost multiple pieces on the defense. And most importantly, they lost Christian Wilkins. So I just think that there's a lot of reasons that this could go really south. I trust Mike McDaniel enough and the talent enough to stop it from going too far south. So that's why I have them at 9-8. But if you told me this season went really poorly and they went 7-10 and Tua maybe got hurt or wasn't quite as good or defenses kind of figured them out and the defense really stunk, I wouldn't be shocked if we're asking some shocking questions about Mike McDaniel, who I love. But I wouldn't be shocked if I think the things that he does and the things he says, I love it. I think it's hilarious. But I think if that team wins 7 or 8 games, I think the NFL media and, the people out there will be relentless about it.
Yeah. He's certainly a fun personality. So I hope wherever he is, hopefully it's in Miami. But if something happens there, hopefully wherever he ends up in front of a microphone a lot. So. Yeah,
I can't imagine this year would go poorly enough for him to get fired. I think, if anything, it would just be like a hot seat situation. But the most interesting thing is, like, what if the Dolphins are bad? Like, you just signed to all this money.
Who I think is the limiting factor to the offense, and now you're tied to him long term.
Yeah, no, there's serious questions to be had about that. I wouldn't have signed that deal, and I'm higher on Tua than you are. I think he's an average quarterback, and I wouldn't have wanted to lock myself in for 4 years to that. I don't know if maybe they can get out after 3 years. I think that I saw someone saying that was possible. But I mean, if they don't play well this year, you've got 2 more years to figure out after this, guaranteed. So it's a messy situation if the Dolphins aren't as good as they think they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's roll on to a team that was not as good as they thought they should have been last year. And granted, we knew this was going to happen after week 1, but it's the New York Jets who seemingly went all in last year. And they lose Aaron Rodgers on the first drive of the opening week and somehow still win that game because Josh Allen went full nuclear meltdown. But they end the year 7-10. And then you get into the offseason. They lose Bryce Huff, Jordan Whitehead, Mekhi Becton, and Lincoln Tomlinson. Theoretically, they added Hassan Reddick, who is yet to report to training camp and is holding out over contract issues that the Jets knew were there when they traded for him, which blows my mind. Just horrifically mismanaged by Joe Douglas. But they did add Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, and Morgan Moses, and then they went out and drafted Olu Fashanu, Malachi Corley, and Braylon Allen. I think 2 big questions for the Jets. One is, will the offensive line do their part? Last year, Jets quarterbacks were sacked 64 times. Now, granted, the QB play was really bad, and sacks are often a QB stat. But they went out and they added Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, which are 2 old guys that used to be really good, and I think they're still fine if they can stay healthy. But then they drafted Olu Fashanu, who I thought was one of the best pass blockers in the draft. And so they invested a lot into the O-line to keep Aaron Rodgers upright. So can Aaron Rodgers be the Aaron Rodgers of 2020, 2021? Like, he was back-to-back MVP. He falls off some in 2022 without Devontae Adams. He wasn't as bad as people said he was, but he falls off a little bit. Then he only plays a few snaps in 2023. So you're several years removed now from an aging Aaron Rodgers playing at an MVP level. Can he do enough with the Jets this year? Can they finally make the playoffs? Or are they going to push for that?
Yes, I have the Jets winning this division. I have serious questions about the Jets. They're probably the team that I'm picking to win a division out of the 8 division winners that I picked that I'm the least confident in. They're definitely the one that I have the most questions about. But I think if you just line up these rosters side by side and you go position by position and rank them 1, 2, 3 with Bills, Jets, and Dolphins, I think I like to do that. I don't know if that's a fun exercise that I do sometimes when I'm between 2 teams. I think it's pretty clear the Jets have the best roster here of these 3 teams. And you could say that maybe the quarterback question is far bigger than the other 2. If Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy at his age, maybe you could say you think Robert Saleh stinks, which I think there's a legitimate argument for. And you think that McDaniel and McDermott are on a way different level. That might be fair. You could say that the Jets are cursed. That might be fair. But if we're just looking at the roster, I think they have the best one, especially on defense. I mean, Hassan Reddick is definitely a missing. It feels like would be a missing piece for them because they have a pretty good pass rush. Obviously, Quinnen Williams on the inside is phenomenal. One of the best inside pass rushers and just defensive tackles in football in general. And you have Jermaine Johnson, who stepped up nicely into that role. You have Michael Clemens, who I think is a nice player, maybe not like a full-time starter, but a nice player. And you have Will McDonald, who you took in the first round last year, who was probably not a top 60 player in the draft, but you took him. You took him in the first round. We'll see. He's going to have to get reps at some point. We'll see. Hassan Reddick's missing he would cement that as a real rotation of 4 edge rushers with Williams on the inside. But it's the back 7 that you have to be excited about. Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley both graded out as top 10 linebackers last year. They're really good at safety. Obviously, we don't have to tell you about Sauce Gardner. Then you have DJ Reed and Michael Carter, who both graded out as top 16 corners in the NFL. So there's just a lot to like about the back 7 of the defense. I have a question for you. This is kind of a broader question. When I say the name Garrett Wilson to you, because you're not a fantasy football guy, so I'm always interested to see the connect. How many receivers off the top of your head do you think are better than Garrett Wilson?
Oh, man, I hate questions like this because I just want to say a number, but then I got to start talking through receivers.
You can give me a range of numbers.
Garrett Wilson, I mean, I think he's probably like in the 11 to 15-ish range of receivers.
I probably agree. I think there's a lot of people out there, and he's being drafted as the number 10 fantasy receiver, maybe number 9. It's kind of in that range right there. There's a lot of people out there who I think would tell you I was actually listening to the Bill Simmons podcast with Anthony DeBundo, and they were talking about it, and they were talking about him as like a right outside the Jefferson and Hill tier, like a top 5 guy. I'd like to see Garrett Wilson accomplish that before. It feels like, he's gotten a lot of credit for having bad quarterbacks and still putting up decent numbers, but he's never had the great year. And I know that that's not his fault. He's obviously very talented. I'm not saying he's not an extremely talented receiver, but this is kind of like a prove it year to me for Garrett Wilson. If Garrett Wilson's as good as everyone says he is, that would be my biggest X factor with this whole thing with the Jets outside of injury with Aaron Rodgers. If Garrett Wilson is the maybe potential top 5 guy in the NFL, guy that people think he is, or this no doubt number 1, the Jets win this division.
All right. Well, they do have the 4th easiest schedule this year. Their over-under is set at 9.5, and I did take that over. I have the Jets in the playoffs. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers' health pending. So let's roll on to the New England Patriots, who last season went 4-13. They lose Trent Brown. They lose Mike Gesicki, Jalen Mills, Mac Jones. Just recently, since we recorded last week, Matthew Judon traded to the Falcons. And they go out and they added KJ Osborne, Sion Takitaki, Antonio Gibson, Austin Hooper, and Jacoby Brissett. And then obviously through the draft, they got Drake May and Jalen Polk. My question for the Patriots was moving on from Bill Belichick the right move? And I think it was. Like, we've talked about that on this show before. But what I don't know if it was the right move was promoting Gerard Mayo, a guy who was already inside the building that was falling apart. And B, has only been a coach for 4 years and was only a position coach. I have serious skepticism about that. Really, for me, what this season boils down to for the Patriots is Drake May. Is he the guy? He doesn't appear in line to start week 1, and they don't have to rush him out there, but you want to get him on the field and see what you have in him. So nothing else matters if Drake May is the guy. You can figure the rest of it out later. They have the 31st easiest strength of schedule, so brutal schedule this year. Their over-under is at 4.5. I'm taking the under for the Patriots. I think this is just going to be a really bad football team.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Patriots fans were complaining after they traded Judon that the GM is just giving Gerard Mayo nothing to work with here. You're really setting up a first-year coach to fail on both sides of the ball, and you're setting Drake May up to fail. I mean, I almost don't want to see Drake May until they can get a few more pieces around him next year. And Elliott Wolf, he comes from the Packers. He's their GM, and he has kind of preached how well it's worked for Mahomes and Rodgers and Love to sit. So I think there's a chance we don't see May this year, which I think would be a shame. But I do think there's a chance that the Patriots could ruin Drake May with how bad that situation is, or at least get him to doubt his confidence and maybe even get him to regress a little bit. So maybe there's an argument to not playing him in this situation. And maybe there's an argument that the Patriots should just go for the first pick, like go get the number 1 pick already. And that's your kind of goal. That's kind of sad, but I'm going under 4.5.
I have a problem with people using that reasoning. Like, there's a difference in drafting Patrick Mahomes and sitting him behind Alex Smith for a year
on a good team
and still making the playoffs. And there's a difference between drafting Aaron Rodgers and sitting him behind Brett Favre, drafting Jordan Love and sitting him behind Aaron Rodgers. Like, then there is drafting Drake May to sit behind Jacoby Brissett on a 3-win football team. Like,
yeah, I agree.
And it depends on the player. Like, you got to be able to figure out if they're going to ingrain bad habits or if the reps are going to be good for them. Like, if they're mentally there, if they're seeing the right things on the chalk, they know the right answers on the chalkboard, put them in the game and get them some experience. And I'm not a big fan of this. Let's draft a guy to sit for a year, especially if you have nobody in front of him.
I generally am not either. I was of the mindset that Minnesota should have played JJ, and I was of the mind before he was hurt, and I was of the mindset that Denver should play Bo. I do think they absolutely should play Bo next to find out what he is, especially since he's 35 years old. But with the Patriots, that situation's so bad that I have my doubts. That's my only problem. Is just I think there's a chance Bryce Young might have been ruined by the situation. And a lot of that might also be on Bryce Young and his physical, stature as well. But I'm more open to the potential of a QB being ruined. I used to say, get the rookie QB in right away. I'm more open to the conversation after watching Bryce Young.
Yeah, I think if you're in a situation where you can't play the guy because you'll ruin him, you shouldn't draft a quarterback yet.
That's fair.
You should take the 3 first-round picks the Vikings offered you to trade up into that slot, reportedly, and build your offensive line and get some weapons and do it later. So that's my only pushback on that. Not to turn this into a huge draft philosophy show.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. So anyways, okay, so that wraps up our AFC East. Let's get into the AFC North, which is a really interesting division to talk about.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Let's start with the Baltimore Ravens, who won the division last year with a 13-4 record. They blew out Houston in the divisional round 34-10, and then lost to Kansas City 17-10 in the AFC title game. This offseason, they lose Patrick Queen, they lose Jadeveon Clowney, Gus Edwards, Geno Stone, Ronald Darby. They lost a trio of offensive linemen in Morgan Moses, John Simpson, and Kevin Zeitler. That's 2,100 snaps of offensive guard play and 778 snaps of offensive tackle play from last year that's gone. They went out and they got Derrick Henry, they got Josh Jones. In the draft, they got Nate Wiggins, Roger Rosengarten, and Adisa Isaac. My question for the Ravens is, will this offensive line be good enough? I mean, they're inserting 3 new starters on the offensive line. Daniel Falele, who was a 4th-round draft pick in the 2022 draft. He's played 355 total snaps in his career. Andrew Voorhees, who they drafted last year and missed his whole season with a rookie season with an ACL injury. And Roger Rosengarten, who was drafted this year. So they have 3 new starters with a total of 355 career NFL snaps between them. I think that is a huge question mark. Now, obviously, Lamar Jackson can negate a lot of that with his scrambling ability. But offensive line's a concern, and on the defensive side of the ball, you lose Mike McDonald. And you were first in defensive DVOA last year, but you lost your DC. You lost 2 pieces of your secondary. You lose Patrick Queen. Like, they lost a lot They have a tremendously difficult schedule. It's the 29th easiest, so basically the fourth hardest schedule. Their over-under is set at 11.5. Mark, I hate to say it, I took the under on the Ravens.
I went over the number. I wouldn't bet it. I actually had them at 13 wins. I still am all in on the Ravens. I think Derrick Henry is going to add another layer to that offense. And I know that there are O-line concerns. I'm a Roger Rosengarten guy, so I think he's going to be able to, he's played a lot in college. I think he's going to be able to step in. I think the two pieces that are Linderbaum, McCarry, and Stanley, who am I missing out of there for the Ravens?
Let's see. I was looking at their depth chart earlier. It currently shows Stanley at left tackle, Linderbaum at center, and then the three new starters would be Andrew Voorhees, Daniel Falele, and Roger Rosengarten.
And is Patrick McCarry listed at all?
He is listed as the backup right tackle behind Rosengarten right now.
Because he graded out pretty well last year on PFF. He graded out 31st out of 81 tackles, well above a league average. So that could be wrong. Maybe he starts over Rosengarten, but I was just going off of that depth chart. No, that's totally fair. That's just interesting. And I think he played most of the year there. He played pretty much most of the year there last year. So that's interesting. Yeah, the big question for me on defense is just, are they going to get anything out of the two guys that they drafted at corner? They got Nate Wiggins early on, and then they got TJ Tampa. I forget when they drafted TJ Tampa, pretty late.
I think it was fourth round. Yeah,
and we thought he was a potential fringe first-round pick, or at least definitely a second-round pick. I definitely like TJ Tampa a lot. I think there's a chance Tampa's the better player of those two guys between Tampa and Wiggins, and I like Wiggins. But I do think that they're able to get some out of at least one of those guys, which I think would be huge because you have two great safeties. You still have a great linebacker. You still feel great about your defensive line. I think they're going to be able to keep the train on the tracks. And I think Lamar, Henry, Zay Flowers, I think takes a big step this year. So I'm betting on Zay Flowers to really take a step into being one of the top 15 to 20 receivers in football. I think you've got two really good tight ends. I think Isaiah Likely is going to get used a lot. So I think they're gonna probably use the two tight ends to potentially mask some stuff with their offensive line, which I think helps Derrick Henry as well. So I think they're going to be an incredible rushing offense, and that front is going to be really good again.
And hopefully, if they make it to an AFC Championship game again, they don't forget they can call run plays.
Yeah,
it's the most frustrating thing last offseason is a guy that had a ticket on Ravens AFC champion, but. I digress. It'll be fascinating to watch Derrick Henry in this offense because he's never really been like a shotgun type running back, and that's obviously what the Ravens are going to run a lot of. So I'm fascinated to watch that. I do have the under, however, I still have them making the playoffs. So I don't think they're going to fall apart. I do think they'll take a step back from last year, though.
Not winning the division?
I do not have them winning the division.
Okay. I think we're going to have a big disagreement then.
Okay, do you have them winning the division?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. All right, well, let's roll on so we can suss this disagreement out. Up next is the Cleveland Browns, who went 11-6 in the regular season. They lost to Houston 45-14 on Wild Card Weekend. Big loss this offseason, losing their starting quarterback, Joe Flacco. They also lost Anthony Walker Jr. and Sion Takitaki. They went out and added Jerry Jeudy, Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Hicks, Deontay Foreman, Tyler Huntley, Devin Bush, and Jameis Winston. I think it's funny that they've got Deshaun Watson's contract and they went out and got Tyler Huntley and Jameis Winston, two guys with starting experience. But in the draft, they drafted Mike Hall Jr., who is already fitting in with the team culture, getting arrested for domestic violence. So great culture fit there for the Browns. They also got Zach Zinter and Jamari Thrash. My big question for them, I got a lot of questions about the Browns. One is, can Ken Dorsey get Deshaun Watson back on track? So they bring in Dorsey, hopefully, not hopefully. If you're a Browns fan, hopefully. I hope Deshaun washes out of the league. But can he get Deshaun back on track? Can the defense return to their near historic form from last season? And I mean the in-season form, not the form that lost by 31 points to a rookie quarterback in the playoffs. And then will Nick Chubb be back? Or when will he be back, and will he be his old self? Obviously has the big injury last year. Would love to see Nick Chubb. He's a fun guy to watch. Would like to see him back on his A game. But they have a hard schedule. The third hardest, 30th easiest, whichever way you want to say it. Their over-under is set at 8.5. And Mark, I'm taking the under on this one.
Yeah, this isn't one I'd bet. I have them at 8 and 9. I just think that, having an elite defense, generally a variable that changes year to year. And I love Myles Garrett. I love JOK, who just got paid. Shout out Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, a guy Shane and I were spot on about in the draft process. Always fun to point that out. I feel good. They have 3 good safeties, to be honest, on this roster. I feel good about corner. I don't think up front is like an absolutely elite unit. So I guess I don't look at this defense and say, oh, no doubt about it, they'll be a top 3 defense again, unless Myles Garrett is just a wrecking crew, which he will be, but to the degree he was last year. I think you obviously nailed the questions on offense. There's a ton of them. Jerry Jeudy is kind of like the upside swing. There's a chance he was just totally lost last year, and because in years past, the nerds who point out separation metrics and things like that pointed out that he was being undervalued and underutilized in Denver. Maybe he gets back to that. Maybe he really levels up to being the guy who he was drafted to be and the guy he looked like he could be early on at points of his career. So that's kind of an upside swing if you're in on it. Something that I've noticed when people are talking about the Browns this year, they're just saying like, oh, and Nick Chubb will be back. We've seen running backs rush back from these types of injuries, whether it be ACL or Achilles, especially Achilles. They usually don't look the same. They usually don't look like themselves. Javonte Williams last year rushed back, kind of a similar timeline to Chubb. Didn't look like himself until like the last probably 10 games of the year. So I guess where would that put you? 8 weeks into the year. And Chubb's going to return later than Javonte did. So it's just I think there's serious questions about the offense. David Njoku had a career year. I don't think that's probably repeatable. He was terrible with Watson, and then much better with Flacco. Same. Mari Cooper was like a world beater with Flacco. He wasn't great with Watson. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But I'm kind of out on the Browns, especially in this division.
Yeah, same. I have all the same concerns. I just don't think. They competed last year with a historically good defense, and we know defensive performance traditionally is not sticky year over year. I just don't think this team's going to be competitive with Deshaun. I just kind of think he's not a good quarterback anymore.
I agree. I would feel better about them if Jameis was the starter.
Yeah, or Huntley. Either one, honestly.
Nah, well, I'd feel better about them personally if Huntley was the starter. I think Huntley might stink, though.
All right. Let's keep rolling on here to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who last season went 10-7 and then lost to the Bills wildcard weekend because, of course, they eked out a winning record and lost wildcard weekend. This offseason, they lost Kenny Pickett, Deontay Johnson, and Chuks Okorafor, their offensive tackle. They added, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Patrick Queen, and Dante Jackson. And then in the draft, they crushed the draft. We loved their draft. Troy Fountainu, Zach Frazier, Roman Wilson, and Peyton Wilson.
All 4. That's unreal how good that draft is.
Yeah, 4 for 4. I feel like there are 2 things certain every single offseason, and it's that I'm going to love the Steelers draft and I'm going to end up hating the Cowboys draft. Yeah. And it just seems to happen over and over and over. But, the question you have to ask is, will the Mike Tomlin streak continue? He's never had a losing record. He hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. Can he continue to thread that needle of mediocrity, making the playoffs in one of the toughest divisions in football and not winning a playoff game? They finally got rid of Matt Canada. They brought in Arthur Smith. Is that going to make an impact? Obviously, Matt Canada wasn't good. I'm not sure Arthur Smith is either, but he can't really be worse. And then the Steelers have got to get off to a strong start. Because have you looked at their schedule week over week?
Yeah, it's brutal. It's a tough schedule.
Their end of the season. Let me read to you their last few weeks. They go at Cincinnati versus Cleveland, at Philadelphia, at Baltimore versus Kansas City versus Cincinnati. That is a brutal 6 weeks to close out the season. So
unless there's a team on that list twice that isn't quite as good as I think people think they are.
All right, maybe so. We'll see. They have the hardest schedule in the NFL. Their over-under is set at 8.5 because, of course, it is. I will take the over because I will just never bet against Mike Tomlin having a winning record until it happens. What are your thoughts on the Steelers?
My thoughts on the Steelers, I think they're one of the best teams in football. I think they're one, I have them at 12 wins. They won 10 games with the worst quarterback play in potentially the NFL last year with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph. I think the thing about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields that's funny is I think they probably have the 23rd and the 24th best quarterback. I think they're both well within starting range. I would rather them start Fields, and I think that there's real upside. If they start Fields, I think it would really help Warren and Harris in the backfield. The big X factor here is, are they going to have Brandon Ayuk when this rolls around? Because they have a trade in place apparently, and the 49ers are kicking the can and kicking it around and trying to figure out what to do. I would suggest to people out there who are as high on the Steelers as I am, or maybe not even as high on the Steelers as I am, but believe in Mike Tomlin to continue the streak at least, go bet over 8.5 now while it's at plus money. It's unbelievable, Shane, that they keep giving us this gift. They keep setting it at 7.5 or 8.5 every year, and they win 9 to 10 games every year. This year, I think they go slightly further than that, though. I think they're going to go win 12 games, and they're going to be a high-ranking wild card only because I'm high on Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, when you get the opportunity to bet the over on a win total set at 8.5 for a guy who literally in 17 seasons as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers has not had a losing record, the under requires a losing record. I can't bet that. I just can't. Even you could tell me that Russell Wilson and Justin Fields both got hurt in practice today, and I'm still taking the over because it's the Mike Tomlin effect. It's just what's going to happen. So I'll take the over here. I don't know if they sneak into the playoffs. It's tough in the AFC, but I'm a big fan.
In games TJ Watt plays in his career, the Pittsburgh Steelers are 64-31-2. 10-7 last year because he played all of them. He actually played the full year.
Yep. All right. Just got to keep him healthy. So, all right, let's move on to the last team that we've danced around so far. It's the Cincinnati Bengals. They went 9-8 last year. Obviously, they lost Joe Burrow for a decent part of the year. So he'll be coming back off of injury. But player-wise, they lose Jonah Williams, DJ Reader, Joe Mixon, Chidobe Awuzie, and Tyler Boyd. They went out and added Trent Brown, Sheldon Rankins. They got Von Bell back, which I think is funny. He goes to Carolina for one season, gets cut, comes back to Cincinnati. They get Mike Gesicki, Geno Stone, Zach Moss in the draft. They got Marius Mims and Jermaine Burton. My question is the offensive line good enough? They're running it back with 4 of the 5 same starters and a rookie, despite ranking 27th in pass block win rate last season. And that's in spite of the fact that they were one of the only teams to have all 5 starters play in all 17 games. And so I'm not sure the offensive line is good enough. And you look at Joe Burrow, who has a ACL, MCL, PCL, meniscus injury his rookie season. I think it was his rookie season. He's got an MCL sprain in there. He has the calf injury last year, a wrist ligament tear, all through 4 years in the league. He's been sacked 148 times in 52 regular season games in his career, which you now tie in the wrist. He's got the wrist injury. Throwing, he's looked good throwing. Throwing is not high stress on a wrist. Falling on it is. And so you got to be concerned the first week or two as Joe Burrow takes sacks and goes down on that arm if that injury is going to reoccur. If it doesn't, I feel really good about this team. They've got an easy strength of schedule. It's the 6th easiest in the NFL. Out of their 11 non-divisional games, they only play 3 teams who had a winning record last year. And so their over-under is at 10.5. I took the over, and I've got them as the division winner. But I also could see this season going terribly sideways if there's an injury to Joe Burrow again.
Yeah, I'm worried about the Bengals operation here. I think that they're the worst team in this division. I have them at 8 wins. I would be more surprised if Cincy made the playoffs or won the division than Cleveland. I just don't know what this team's very good at. I look at the roster, and I'm worried about Joe Burrow at this point. They're not letting him throw 3 days in a row. He's only allowed to throw 2 days in a row. I get that he wasn't healthy coming into last year, but he never looked like Joe Burrow at any point last year. And then he got an injury that no pitcher or NFL quarterback has ever had. I have serious doubts about Joe Burrow at this point, on top of the fact that I think maybe we crowned Joe Burrow in the Josh Allen tier a little bit too early. And I think if we were to compare like the Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts resumes, I think people would be surprised. And not just Jalen Hurts, that tier, Dak. Obviously, Dak doesn't have the Super Bowl trip, but a couple of those guys in that tier, I think are closer to Joe Burrow or as good as Joe Burrow. I don't think people would think that. But if I think Joe Burrow isn't going to have a top 3 quarterback season, and I have concerns about his health, I think that downgrades the receivers. And outside of the quarterback and outside of Jamar and T, I don't know if they have a position group that they're top 10 in. Like, I look around and, the O-line's fine. I actually am not that, concerned about it, but I think it's fine. I don't think it's a strength. I look at the defensive line. They lost DJ Reader, which I think was a big loss. Miles Murphy is not panned out to what I thought he'd be and what they thought he'd be. Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, they're getting older. Linebacker doesn't get you too excited looking at it. I just think the secondary, Von Bell getting back is nice. Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, you feel pretty good about safety. I guess you could say safety is where they're top 5 to 10 in. Everything else, I've got some questions about corner. Outside of Mike Hilton, who's playing? Cam Taylor-Britt is fine. I don't know. I have some questions about this Bengals roster. And it kind of goes back all the way to when they made the Super Bowl. I remember saying, this would be the worst roster to ever win a Super Bowl. I feel like I'm looking at a lot of the same names.
Yeah. I can see that. I can see some of that. I think Burrow is better than he showed last year. I don't think he's that top 3 quarterback that people want to make him out to be. Maybe he'll prove that wrong this year, but I really like the duo of wide receivers that they do have. And I think their secondary could be pretty good this year. But to me, I look at this division, and I've got questions about everybody, like we talked about with the Ravens O-line, and like we talked about with the Steelers, just their quarterback play and their end-of-season schedule. So to me,
they have the least questions. I picked Baltimore to win the division. I think Pittsburgh has the least amount of questions because the question's quarterback, but they had the worst quarterback play in the league last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other teams have more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess I'm rolling the dice a little bit with the Bengals, but definitely very concerned about the Joe Burrow wrist injury. However, I did not expect to pick them to be the division winner and have you pick them to be the 4th best team in the division. That's not something I was expecting.
I have them at 8 and 9, so I have them tied with Cleveland. But I would, if you asked me, you have to give one of them an extra win on your list, I would give it to Cleveland.
All right. Well, there you guys have it. There are AFC East and North previews. Next week, we will be finishing this up, breaking down the AFC West and the South, do our awards draft, and then we'll get into, regular season grind as we go. But Mark, before we get out of here, do you have any final thoughts or takes that you need to fire off to the people?
Final thoughts or takes. I'm trying to think here. Draft James Conner in your fantasy league. So when he plays with Kyler Murray, he's an elite running back. Last year, the last 5 weeks of the year, he had 4 top 5 finishes. And in the week that he wasn't a top 5 finisher, he he finished 11th. So all 5 weeks that he played with Kyler to end the year, he was pretty much an elite running back. So figure out a way to draft James Conner in the 5th, 6th, 7th round.
All right, there you go. Draft James Conner. Mark, I've got a final thought. It's a take that I need to float out here to you at 49 minutes into a podcast where it's buried and nobody ever hears it. Are the Atlanta Falcons a threat for the 1 seed in the NFC?
I've been saying it. They're a threat to win the Super Bowl, Shane.
Oh, I feel like I remember you mentioning that too. Like, I mean, if Kirk Cousins is healthy and you look at the weapons that they have, right? Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, you go out and you got Bijan Robinson, like that offense could be really good. And now all of a sudden they get Matthew Judon. They allegedly, this isn't official yet, but it's been reported they have signed Justin Simmons. That'll give you Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates as your safeties. Whew. You bring in Raheem Morris, who's a defensive guy, to put all the pieces together. And we've talked before about expecting a fall off from the Cowboys and or the 49ers. I think this team could very much so be in contention to win the NFC.
I was in on the Falcons. I have them in the NFC Championship, losing to the Eagles. But I was in on the Falcons when we recorded our NFC South show. I guess that was only last week. And that was the big question. And what I said was the X factor for this pick. I had them winning 12 games, and I had them going to the NFC Championship. The X factor is we just need Raheem Morris to make their defense average. Not even good, just average. And guess what? They just added Matthew Judon, most importantly, and may have added Justin Simmons. So those two pieces only help to that goal. I think there's a chance that they're above average. And if they're above average, they will win that division, and they will contend in the NFC. All
right. Well, I did forget that you said that. I've recorded a lot of podcasts, a lot of different places since then. So maybe not out of left field there. We can whisper this into our microphones together here at minute 51 where nobody will hear it.
This is a Falcons podcast.
Officially a Falcons podcast. Anthony chimes in and says, Kirk Cousins has 1 win in his playoff career. Mr. Sandman says he'll believe it when he sees it. Just saying.
Real quick.
File it away.
I see a comment from Mr. Sandman saying, Burrow outside of Mahomes is the most talented quarterback in football. If we're just talking pure talent, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are on a completely different level talent-wise than Joe Burrow. If you want to make the case like his moxie and his leadership, and he's a gunslinger and he's less afraid, whatever you want to say, maybe you could argue he's in that tier. I don't think he is. I don't think he's in the Allen Lamar tier. But he's definitely not more talented than those guys. Those guys are freaks.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Like, there's some arm strength things with Burrow that were always a concern.
I love Burrow, but
they haven't turned into a big deal. He's a very cerebral player and all that. But yeah, if you're just talking pure on-field talent, I wouldn't have him in my top 4 or 5 probably.
While we're on the topic, Joe Burrow is being drafted, I think, QB6 in fantasy. Don't draft Joe Burrow when you can draft Kyler Murray or Jordan Love 3 rounds later. Friends don't let friends do it.
There you go. Final thoughts there from Mark on your fantasy draft. Thank you guys for joining us for episode 165 of Chalk Talk. If you enjoy what you heard on the show, and we know that you do, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. Drop us a 5-star rating wherever you stream your podcasts. Man, I can't wait to get to the regular season and be breaking down games. We're almost there, Mark. You guys can follow us on Twitter. I am at Shane Half NFL. He is at Mark Henry Jr. And we'll catch you guys next time.
Wait. I'm beating the buzzer. I found an argument against Anthony. My guy, by the way, one of my favorite guys on Twitter, is a loyal Chalk Talk listener, Anthony. Kirk Cousins, is this the best team Kirk Cousins has ever been on, roster-wise? It has to be, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Probably.
Yeah, sorry. Redo the outro. I'm sorry.
That's it. That's all we got. Let's roll the music.